hasn't changed at all. So while they're standing beside you, won't you tell them the score? Won't you tell them a story of the days in the way back when? Every now and then.
This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.
Today's television gets its programs from all over the place. They come into our living rooms from over the airwaves, from cables underground, and from satellites orbiting in outer space. Our TVs can be as tiny as wristwatches, or fill an entire room with brilliant colors and stereo sound. And that's not all. The hearing impaired can read the words to their favorite shows, children can play their favorite video games, and we can see our favorite movies time and again. Today's television gets I remember the real early days of television back in the mid-50s. All the shows were in black and white, and we only had 3 channels to pick from, and they only broadcast during certain daytime hours. And the station's equipment used to break a couple of times a week. Right in the middle of a show, your picture would go blank or the sound would go dead. And that would be that.
I'm glad that doesn't happen today. We'd miss our favorite shows.
It wasn't too bad. We half expected it. But the best part would be when the actors made mistakes or forgot their lines. You see, most of the shows and commercials were done live, right in the studio. I remember watching a peanut butter commercial. The announcer was telling us how smoothly the peanut butter spread when he ripped the bread right in half. And he had to continue saying his lines. Another time, right at the end of a long, exciting mystery show, the detective was explaining how the murder was committed. And he forgot the name of the murderer. So he said, "You know, whatchamacallit did it." We never found out who the killer actually was, but we were laughing so hard that it didn't really matter.
This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.
It used to be if you wanted to see a certain movie, you had to make sure you got to the theater within a week or so, or the show would change and you would miss it. And that would be that.
Not anymore, though.
That's right. VCRs have changed all that forever. You can rent movies for a night or two, buy them, or tape them off television. In a way, VCRs let us control our TVs. We can pick the movie we want to watch or hook the VCR to a video camera and watch our own home movies.
This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.
You may think that you don't know how to use a computer, but you do.
What do you mean?
Well, take your CD player, for instance. It's actually a computer which uses tiny laser beams to read information from the compact disc and then convert it into music. This digital method produces clean, clear stereo sounds with none of the scratching and hissing noises that we had with old-fashioned records.
Is that what makes it stereo?
No. To have stereo sound, you need at least 2 speakers. Each speaker plays back a different part of the music, so it sounds as if the musicians were right there in front of you. Some on your left side, and some on your right.
When I was little, there were all different kinds of records. 78s, 45s, and LPs, or long-playing albums. The older records were usually 78s. That meant that the record spun around on the turntable 78 times every minute. 78s were big and heavy and very easy to break, and they could only fit 1 or 2 songs on each side. 45s were what most of the kids bought. They had 1 song on each side, a hit song which the radio station played, and a B-side which nobody really listened to. You could buy them for about $1 or so, and that's where a lot of my allowance went on Saturday afternoons.
The Victrola was the showpiece of our parlor when I was a youngster in the 20s. In the evenings, when the dinner dishes were done, we would gather round and listen to some of the greatest stars of our day right in our own home. You had to wind up the Vic and give the turntable a spin to get it started, and the sounds that came out of the megaphone were a bit tinny, but we heard music that we never heard before. And sometimes, late on a Saturday night, I'd sneak down onto the landing and see Mom and Dad, with the carpet rolled off to the side of the living room, dancing to the music of the Vic.
Of course, no one in his right mind would have imagined a talking or singing machine when I was a girl way back in the middle of the last century. Who would have thought of such a thing? But that isn't to say that we didn't have our music. Why, walk down any street in our town on a summer evening and you'd hear the sounds of half a dozen hymns or other tunes floating out the front doors as you passed by. Every house had a piano. All the women could play, and we girls took lessons right through childhood. And when company came to call, men and women entertained themselves by gathering around the piano singing the popular songs of the day.
Thomas Edison invented the record player in December of 1877. He called it a phonograph, just about a year before he invented the light bulb.
Why did he call it a phonograph?
Well, the word means sound writer, and that's just what Edison's machine did. It took the sound waves produced by his voice and wrote them onto a tinfoil cylinder, which served as the first record. And what were the words that Tom Edison spoke into his phonograph on that historic day?
I know, listen. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow.
This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.
Time passes by us very smoothly. 1 minute is no shorter or longer than the next. And that simple fact has caused no end of headaches for clockmakers for hundreds of years.
How come?
Because it's the job of the clockmaker to make a machine that works almost as smoothly as time itself. A machine that never changes speed from 1 minute to the next. They've built clocks powered by falling water and falling sand, and clocks that ticked off the hours using pendulums and weights and springs and even electricity. But none were as smooth as the passing minutes. But then, scientists discovered that the atoms which make up common quartz, like the sand at the beach, vibrate at a pace that simply never changes minute to minute, month to month, year to year. A quartz clock. What a perfect way to measure time. The gears inside a mechanical clock are driven either by an unwinding spring or by a falling weight, which causes a toothed wheel called an escape wheel to rotate very precisely. As a matter of fact, the tick-tock you hear is actually the sound of the escape wheel escaping to turn one tooth at a time. As it rotates, the escape wheel causes a number of other gears to turn along with it, all at different speeds. It turns the minute hand directly, one complete rotation every hour, and the hour hand indirectly, reducing its speed to complete one rotation every 12 hours.
Today, you and I are used to measuring time down to the minute. We know exactly when school starts in the morning and lets out in the afternoon, when we have to be home at night, and when our favorite TV shows come on. But it didn't used to be that way.
It didn't?
No. For hundreds of years, folks had no use for minutes or even hours. In fact, the only clock in a village or town was likely to be found in the bell tower of the church. So time was something you heard rather than saw. The bells would chime the passing hours to remind the villagers of their morning, noon, and evening prayers. And they would toll the death of a neighbor, one bell for each year he lived. And they even sounded the alarm in case of fire or invasion.
The grandfather's clock standing in our hallway did more than count the hours for our family. It kept a watch on the night sky for us as well.
How did it do that?
You see, right above the face of the clock was a painted dial that moved pictures of the moon around from day to day. That way we knew when to expect a full moon, a new moon, or when it was in its first or last quarters. Now, knowing the phase of the moon may not seem that important, but for a farm family like ours, a full moon at planting or harvest meant that we could spend extra hours working in the fields, so it sure mattered to us.
We had an old 8-day wind-up hanging on the wall of our parlor when I was little. It was made from cherry wood, and it had a glass door with a pendulum inside that swung back and forth. On the quietest afternoons, especially in winter time when the windows were closed, I could hear its ticking even from the kitchen. But every 15 minutes when it chimed, you could hear it anywhere in the house. And every Sunday morning, like clockwork, my father would open the glass door and wind it up with a special key in 3 places. One for the time, one for the Westminster chimes, and one for the bells that tolled the hours.
The pendulum and wind-up clocks of the old days were pretty complicated pieces of machinery with lots of gears and other moving parts inside them. But the newer electric clocks that we had in the 50s only needed a simple motor, an electric current to keep time, so they got much lighter and smaller. And they also took on quite a number of different shapes. We had plastic clocks in the shape of houses and ships, and even one that looked like a cat whose tail swung back and forth like a pendulum. This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.
The next time your mom picks up a little baby, watch what she does. Without even knowing it, she'll probably start to rock the baby back and forth, either on her hip or her shoulder. Or maybe even start walking the baby back and forth across the room. It seems that from the cradle we would all rather move around than be still. So what do? We make chairs that move us around, even when we're sitting in one place. We make chairs to rock us back and forth, to swivel or spin us around, and that recline to the point where we're almost lying down. And that's not all. Some of us buy chairs that we can plug in, either to warm us like an electric blanket or to vibrate or jiggle us around. Why? Because it makes us feel better. It's just the way we're made.
Pretend you've just walked into an empty barn and are looking for a place to sit. You can sit down on the wood floor, of course, or you can go over and lower yourself onto that nice, soft pile of hay over there in the corner. Which do you choose?
The hay.
Of course. And that's pretty much the idea behind the rocking chair that sat on our front porch during summers when I was growing up. You see, instead of hard wood, its seat was woven from rushes. Just straw, really. But the seat was soft. It gave a little when you sat down on it. And it was cool, too, because it was woven and not solid. It let the air circulate through the seat, even while you were sitting on it.
Our family's rocker was more than just a chair. It was a piece of furniture, a work of art, and a playground all rolled into one. To begin with, it was big. 2 or 3 of us little ones would sit on its curved seat side by side, and we'd get it rocking so hard that it would almost tip over, first one way and then another. On summer evenings, I'd sit back on Mother's lap as she knitted by the light of an open window. I'd gaze idly at the fireflies and usually fall asleep listening to the crickets and the little squeaks the chair made as it rocked on the parlor floorboards. I remember beautiful red and gold stencils painted up and down its back, but by the time I got older, we had just about worn them off.
Our rocking chair was a pretty makeshift affair. Father brought home the idea from a trip to Massachusetts where he'd seen one in a cabinet maker's shop, and he decided to fashion one himself. My favorite chair in our house had a writing tablet for an armrest. It was comfortable for me, but nobody else in the family seemed partial to it. Father took my chair, bent 2 strips of hickory into shape for the runners, and fitted them into grooves which he'd sawn into the bottom of the chair legs. And don't you know that after that it was everybody's favorite chair? This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den. Electric lights turn the night into daytime in our house. We have all kinds of different lights and light bulbs. The most popular light bulbs are called incandescent bulbs. They give off a yellowish light and are very, very hot. Lighting a room or even a house takes lots of electricity, so scientists are inventing new light bulbs that use less energy. And we can do our part too.
I know, by remembering to turn off the lights when we leave a room.
Right.
To make a fire burn, 3 things are needed. There must be heat, there must be air, and there must be fuel or something to burn. Inside Edison's light bulb, only 2 of the ingredients are present. Electricity supplies the energy, and the little carbon wire or filament is the fuel. But there is a vacuum, or lack of air, inside the bulb. So instead of burning up, the filament gets terrifically hot. So hot that it glows white. And it's that glowing filament that we call electric light. When I was a kid, Mom and Dad put a new kind of light up in the ceiling of our family room. They weren't like light bulbs at all. They were more like long tubes of light. These fluorescent lights glowed a sort of bluish color. They flickered a little bit, and you could actually hear them hum when you turned them on. They didn't heat up the room the way regular bulbs did, and were just warm to the touch. The electricity they used went into making light rather than heat.
I remember the day the electrician came to our house to put in our first electric lights. Before then, we had gas lights. They were just jets of flame surrounded by glass globes. To make the room brighter, we turned up the gas, but not too far because an open flame could cause a fire. Our house had a gas meter in the basement, and to get gas to your lights for a couple of days, you had to put a quarter in the meter.
Did the electrician put in lights all over your house?
No, if I recall, he had only installed 2 lights that day, one in the upstairs hall and one in the living room, and he ran the electric wires right through the old gas pipes. The new Edison lights didn't hiss like gas lamps, and they made our rooms a lot brighter too. And from then on, that's where I did my homework at night, on the floor right next to our new electric light.
We used oil lamps for light in the evenings. They looked like little boats of oil with a wick at one end and a handle at the other, so they could be carried from room to room. When we could afford it, we used whale oil in our lamps, which burned bright and clean. Whaling ships traveled the 7 seas in those days, harpooning whales for their oil. The ships were gone for years at a time. It was terrible and dangerous work, and the whalers almost wiped out several different kinds of whales in the process. But we rarely thought about such things back then.
Each year, when the long, bright days of summer drew to an end, Mother announced that it was time to prepare the year's supply of candles. We made our candle wax by mixing animal fat and sheep's tallow, adding beeswax to keep them hard. Some families in the neighborhood still poured liquid wax into tin molds, but we dipped ours, using braided flax for the wicks. Sometimes we crushed fragrant berries into the wax, so that we'd have fine-smelling candles to burn during holidays.
Bayberry candles are my favorite.
Now, candle making was hot work, which is why we saved it for the cool of the year. We had to make our supply last through the winter, and we were careful not to waste them. Most of the time, when the sun set, we just went to bed, unless there was a full moon, that is. You have no idea how dark it was. It's hard for us today to understand what nighttime actually is. When the sun goes down, we flip on the lights and continue what we were doing as if nothing happened. Outside, street lights blink on and cars pass by, their path lit by headlights. But imagine a world without electric light, a world where candles, a fireplace, and an oil lamp were all you had to light your way.
Not even a flashlight?
Nope. This was the world as Thomas Edison found it, but that isn't the way he left it. Mr. Edison's electric light bulb made a soft, steady source of light available to all. And that's not all it did. Because it glowed rather than burned, it gave off no harmful gases the way candles and torches, kerosene and oil lamps did, and people breathed a lot easier as a result. And the absence of an open flame cut down the risk of fire, too. This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.
Sofas are in-between pieces of furniture, half chair and half bed. They're upholstered so they're nice and soft, and because they're so long, they're great places to stretch out and read or daydream, and just the right size for a Sunday afternoon nap.
Most early furniture was made out of wood in all sorts of styles. In the old days, for example, people used to gather around the fireplace to get warm, but this was also probably the draftiest place in the house. So the local furniture maker would build chairs and benches with wings on either side. If you sat back in such a chair, its wings would shield your head from the drafts and would tend to keep the fireplace heat in place, too.
That sounds better than an electric blanket.
Maybe as warm, but not as soft. You see, for a long time after city folk were able to buy upholstered sofas and wing chairs, their country cousins made do with wooden furniture, made comfortable by blankets and pillows.
We didn't use the parlor in our house very much when I was a girl back in the 20s. Only on Sundays, as a matter of fact. That's the day we entertained visitors, aunts and uncles and cousins who would come across town by trolley, arriving for dinner early in the afternoon and afterwards sit visiting in the parlor with my parents and me. On Saturday night, Mom would open up the room and take the dust covers off the furniture, including the davenport which sat across from the mantel. It was upholstered in a heavy red fabric with a floral pattern sewn into it, and to me it smelled faintly of talc and my aunt's perfumes. And to this day I never set eyes on a fabric like that without memories of those perfumes and quiet conversations.
This is the living room. You might call it the family room or den.